Okay, welcome everybody to our second IABC Asia Pacific webinar program. It's been great to be able to kick these off, and we've certainly had a lot of interest, and I'm sure that will grow over the coming months. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to have Deb Camden join us and do her presentation. This is something that's very close to my heart, particularly at the start of the year. First of all, I'll introduce myself, which I failed to do at the start of the last webinar. My name's Lisa McNally, and I am part of the IABC Asia Pacific Board. I'm based in Brisbane. I work as a communications manager at CSG International with a focus on internal communications, but I also have a role obviously on the IABC APAC board in the professional development area. So this year, I'm also pleased to share with you that we are going to be having a regional conference in Singapore in August, and there's more information on our website about that. There's going to be some great speakers, obviously some great networking opportunities, but it'll just be fantastic to bring all of our IABC members and non-members together in Asia Pacific to be able to focus on communications for our region specifically. So fabulous event, fabulous city. So let me now introduce you to Deb. She's a career communicator and the innovator behind the communication dividend, which is the new best practice solution for proving and improving value of communication. Unbelievably, her career spans 37 years, which she won't have her video on today, but believe me, she must have started when she was about 3, if that's the case. It's included journalism, marketing roles, including managing all aspects of marketing, advertising and media relations for the Gold Coast IndyCar Grand Prix. Strategic communication advisor roles for local, state and federal government. And today she's the founder and principal of boutique communication consultancy Prism Communication Architects. She's also the innovator behind the communication dividend, which is a new measurement and evaluation solution for communication and PR professionals. I have to also share with you the fact that Deb's first paid job was performing as a children's character, Humphrey B. Bear. You may remember him in shopping centre promotions. And I was quite interested to find this out because my first role was also performing as a children's character in shopping centre. So maybe that's the kickstart to a career in communications. Deb's favourite city in our region is Singapore, which is fantastic. I hope to see her therefore at the IABC APAC Regional Conference this August. So today Deb's going to help us to kick off 2017 with a great start with some good information on making measurement count. So over to Deb. Oh, and one more thing before I hand over to you, Deb. I did want to point out that Deb's going to be taking questions and answering those midway through the presentation as well at the end. So if you have any questions to ask, please use the Q&A tool that you'll find on the webinar. I believe it's in the top section of the there. If you sort of move your mouse around, you'll see it pop up. Thanks, Deb.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Lisa. And you asked me to just give you a reminder that you were recording when we started.
Yep, we're recording this session, so it will be available to you afterwards if you want to refresh your memory on anything that Deb's covered.
Terrific. Thanks, Lisa, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today, wherever you are in Asia and the Pacific region. I'm very excited to be sharing my measurement journey and learnings with you over the next hour. And I'd really like to congratulate all of you who are members of IABC. I've been a member for over a decade, and it's the best professional investment I make each year. I think Lisa's pulled up a poll there. If you can complete that poll for us, it'll let me know who I'm conversing with today. So as Lisa said, I'm sure you'll have, a range of questions, so please don't wait to the end. I will split halfway through so that we can, I can get a sense of what's of interest to you. So moving right along then, sort of 2 years ago, I had what I would say was an aha moment. After 35 years of being in this profession, I really started thinking deeply about why don't organisations understand the value we create. And I became a woman on a mission, really determined to find out why and to solve the problem through new thinking. And as part of that voyage of discovery, I started realizing just how much money is spent on communication and public relations each year, over, $14 billion. And yet, how do we prove our value? How do we let anybody know the proof of the value we're creating? So to help me, and in kicking off today, I'd like to just start with my own little poll of you and ask you to advise me, do you regularly use any form of measurement to assess the performance of your communication activity or function? So I'll give you a moment just to reply to that. So Lisa, would you share that result with me? Okay, well, that is very encouraging. We've got 80% of you are regularly using measurement to assess performance, and 20% who are not. So that is a tremendous start. So you've already got started on measurement and evaluation in your career. So I will look forward to learning from you today as well, because the average in a most recent study done in the United States was that less than 50% of communication practitioners regularly use any form of measurement to assess their performance. So good on all of you who are. So really what I wanted to share with you today was the journey that has brought me to this place of really being what I would call a born-again measurement and evaluation evangelist. I can't believe that I've been in this profession for more than 30 years, as Lisa said. And in that time, if you average that I did, say, 12 strategies a year, that's about 360 strategies and plans that I've written myself. And yet it got me thinking deeply about what budget had ever been applied for evaluation of these strategies and plans. And I would estimate that fewer than 6 of those strategies have had a decent sized budget for evaluation. So I had an aha moment, as I said, and I really wondered then, why as a profession do we not spend more time concentrating on measurement? And I really formed the view that, we're people who generally love words more than numbers. And we love a good media release, love a good activity, whereas we tend not to love numbers as much. And yet we're now living in a 24/7 world. We have amazing tools and tips available to us through information technology. The information revolution has changed the pathway for all of us. And yet when it comes to communication, we don't always access those tools. And I really figured that it was time for us to get smart. Now, as Lisa mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time. I was one of the first graduates from what is now QUT, and measurement was certainly not part of anything that we were looking at that time. And so I went back to the books and started looking at all of the theoretical models that are out there. And I hope, if nothing else today, for those of you who are taking part in the webinar, you will walk away with some deeper knowledge as to the theoretical frameworks that are out there for measurement and evaluation, as well as an applied framework that I want to share with you today. I've got a question here from Emily. Let me have a look. Emily, we will address that. I really would love to talk to you about dashboards, and in the second half of my presentation, I'm going to take you through an example of a dashboard, and would love to be able to talk a little more about that then, if you're happy to wait. Okay, moving on. So you'll see here, these are the foundation types of theoretical models that you will see when it comes to communication. On the left-hand side, there's the pyramid model of PR research. And as I started looking, what I found was that there were stacks of models that were out there that told you what you should do, but not how you should do it. And in fact, as a practitioner and a long-term communication consultant, what I was looking for was not only what I should be measuring, but how should I be doing it and with what tools. So even just a quick glance at this, you'll see that the challenge of measurement really is approached from quite a few different dimensions, none of which are consistent, I would have to say. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see, yet another 3 different ways that you can look at measurement and evaluation. But with each one of those, I looked at it from a practitioner's lens and just thought, I don't know how to apply this. I don't know how to use these approaches. When you have a look at the approaches of the Public Relations Institute of Australia, you start to see sort of a better alignment, I think, between activity, outputs, outcomes, and business results. And this elaborates on the PRIA framework. But what for me was deficient here, and I'm just highlighting the area, often with communication and public relations, it's largely treated as a bolt-on to organisational strategy. Some bit of magic needs to take place between what the organisation wants of communication and designing communication objectives. So for me, that was very much a missing link in the whole approach to measurement and evaluation. I also wanted to point out that for some of you who aren't aware of it, AMEC, the International Association of Measurement and Evaluation of Communication, has recently launched an integrated measurement framework, and I would urge all of you to take time to explore it. They are really doing great work in terms of trying to give communicators the tools to be able to measure. But yet again, for me, the deficiency in this framework is this lack of alignment to organisational objectives, where somehow the objectives that we have in communication need to be able to magically appear in terms of the relationship to organisational strategy. So that's when I went looking for the missing link. No mean feat, as I'm sure you can imagine, because my very strong view is that unless we can show our value to our organisations in terms of our organisational strategy, then communication will not be able to prove its value. So in light of that, I then started looking at how do we go about designing communication strategy? How can we prove our value? And the word dividend, the communication dividend, is designed to be a term that, everyone in business understands. A dividend is a way of an expression of value. And I wanted to be able to really show that communication does provide a dividend to organisations as a whole. But for that to happen, we need to start at the centre. We need to start at our organisation's purpose, the vision, mission and values. Building out from that, we go to the organisational strategy. And in this instance, I'm referring to the balanced scorecard approach of Kaplan and Norton, but it doesn't really matter what methodology your organisation uses, provided you have your communication strategy effort directly aligned to and compatible with your organisational strategy, then I think you are well on the path to proving value. Too often we leap to communication strategy, but before that stage, I believe we need to talk within our organisations to identify the expectations that the organisations have of their communication function. What do they want from us? Then and only then can we truly define SMART objectives. And by that I mean specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time specific. Then when we understand and have agreed those SMART objectives, can we plan and agree the measures, and then ultimately evaluate and report. I'm sure many of you, like me, have got to the end of a strategy, breathed a big sigh of relief and thought, thank goodness, I now just have to write the monitoring and evaluation section and I will be done. In my view, it has to be there at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end, if you truly want to be able to have a dividend to your organisation. And in this outer circle, what I believe is that communication has both creates financial value, it creates non-financial value, and it is the realm of communication to understand stakeholder expectations for our organisation. So the other aspect of this approach is that if you take any part out of the middle of that donut, it no longer works. It is no longer complete. And for communication to truly be effective, I believe we need one integrated solution that is driven by organisational purpose. In my journey, my measurement journey, I soon realised that between Australia, North America, Europe and England, there is a whole range of different terms that are used: inputs, outputs, outcomes, outtakes, outflows, and it's very hard to make sense of them. So what I've designed here is what I call the communication value chain, and it picks up all of those terms but treats them in a slightly different way, through a slightly different lens. Everything above the line, I say, are transactional measures. And they are things that you basically do by counting, that you are able to easily count, measure. No research is needed. The aspects of measurement below the line, intermediate outcomes, and the communication dividend are all parts of the communication value chain that require research in order to understand them. So when you start to look at your role, what you do, the value you create, you can start to plot what you're doing through any one of those particular boxes. And this works at an organisational level, it can work at a functional level, it can work at a program level, at a campaign level. But too often, and very often, we're required to show the impact of our work very early in the piece, and that's where intermediate outcome allows you to have a point in time measure of the effect of communication on an audience. And in the transformational end, that's where I believe communication creates even greater value, because we've brought about a change in behaviour in our audience, and that is the ultimate value of communication, is to change behaviour in a desired direction, whatever that direction is, to maximise, to minimise, or to eliminate. And the final part of the value chain that I've expressed there is the value to the business that communication provides. And they are things like reputation, which we're all very aware of, but communication also can have a major role to play in terms of organisational success around perhaps regulatory approval, could be voter behaviour, it could be employer of choice, designation, employee productivity. So communication has a very important role to play in the overall result and performance of the organisation. And in my view, you cannot prove your value unless you truly understand how you're contributing to your organisation's success. So at this point, I'd like to just have a little pause and ask if there are any questions out there. As I said earlier, we've got one from Emily, but if you don't mind, Emily, I would like to address that in the second half. Are there any other questions from our participants today? I must have you riveted. Okay, well, I might just keep moving then. So what I've tried to show you to this point is almost that evolution of measurement and evaluation, the approaches that have been developed by academics and which have a lot of merit. But in my journey, I couldn't work out how to really apply those models. And I think largely the reason that we don't measure is just because it's too hard, it's too complex, and we don't have the tools to do so. And certainly that is the view that was expressed. The USC Annenberg Strategic Communication and Public Relations Center in the United States does a gap study and a public relations generally accepted practices. I would urge you to have a look at that when you have time. And this really struck me as being a seminal moment in that there is a lack of faith in current tools and a need for new tools that do a better job of measuring actual outcomes and actions rather than outputs. So for me, that was really confronting to realise that as a profession, we tended to focus on outputs rather than outcomes. And I think the reason we do it is because it's very difficult. We haven't had those tools. So the next part of my measurement journey was to set about trying to design that tool that would make it easier for a communication professional to do their job. And again, digital technology has changed everything for us, and suddenly as a profession we're faced with many options that are made possible in terms of social media measurement, and in the online world there are a plethora of tools that are available. I've done a lot of work in infrastructure over the years, and I was always hugely impressed by the dashboards that were set up for major projects, for safety, for really areas that you would consider business critical, and yet there was nothing that was easily accessible for communication. So part of my discovery was that there are a range of tools out there, and you indicated earlier that you are often regularly measuring things. But what I couldn't find was a tool that actually took a strategy approach that aligned to organisational strategy, that allowed you to look at the inputs, outputs, outcome approach, and to measure your ultimate dividend of communication. So, Emily, just picking up on your question, my advice on the simplest dashboard format from the perspective of the person updating it monthly, I don't want to sort of have a circular question, but I really believe that if you truly understand your organisational strategy, then you will understand what SMART objectives you are meant to be achieving, or what KPIs you're meant to be achieving. So the best dashboard and the simplest one that actually is one that illustrates and shows progress against the KPIs for which you are responsible. So hopefully I've answered that one for you. Azam, what criteria should we consider before we choose any tools of measurement? Just in relation to that, you need to look at what your organisation is currently using in terms of measurement tools, and whether you can piggyback in relation to those. I've found that most of the communication firms that I'm working with are able to have their own standalone dashboarding software. But in terms of the criteria, it really comes down to what resources you have to keep your dashboard up to date, what information and insights are being sought from your organisation. Cost will be one of those criteria. Then the resources to be able to keep it up to date, because as you well know, data is only as good as the information that's there. Your ability to make decisions is limited by the currency of it. And to me, one of the things is how flexible and adaptable it is to your environment that you're working in. So I might just move on to Kim's question. Do you also find that budget is a reason for not measuring? As a consultant, I often find measurement budget is cut by the client. Absolutely, Kim. I think it has been the big challenge for communicators for a long time is getting budget for measuring. But I guess in my evangelical sense, I would say that we can't afford not to measure anymore. You don't have to spend a lot of money to be able to start measuring. You know, simple counting can get you started, but there's never been a better time to be able to access information-based and web-based tools to be able to capture the impact of your work. So I think things are changing. I do think organisations, when they can see that this is about showing the value of communication to the organisation, are far more willing to look at measurement than if it's purely measuring activity without impact to the overall organisation. Just check to see. I've got another question here from my colleague, Cheryl Gray. Hi, Cheryl. How significant is the short-term nature of projects and political cycles in influencing communicators' approach to measurement? In other words, how can we measure long-term outcomes when your bosses want to see short-term results? Generally, I would say, Cheryl, that comes back to being very clear in terms of what your objectives are for any communication activity that you're undertaking, and your ability to identify organisational expectations at the outset, being able to translate those into actionable communication objectives. Because if you can't do that, and if you can't agree that, no matter what the long-term nature or short or long-term nature of an activity is, you're never going to meet those expectations. It is impossible to measure attitude change and belief change in the short term, which is also why that notion of an intermediate outcome is helpful, because it allows you to look at any change in behaviour, whether that behaviour is that someone has responded to an invitation to download an application form, whether it's that they've made a phone call, whether they've visited a website, whether they've retweeted information. If you consider those actions as being below the line that I was referring to earlier, then you know you have had an impact on your audience and you have brought about a change of behaviour. And I would urge everybody to revisit the communication life cycle, because it is a great asset in helping you work out really what the impact is of and the purpose of your communication, whether it's awareness, interest, creating intent, whether it's building knowledge or advocacy. So I hope that's answered those questions. I'll just check to see if I've got any more here. Oh, I've got another one from Glenda. One of the core questions I always ask is for management to quantify how they will measure success. Failing that, most organisations are metric driven, so any metrics that show a relevant improvement or outcome works. That's true, Glenda, I agree with you. It's not only how they will measure success, but I think as we become more competent in being able to understand and own the metrics that are relevant to our function and to our role that communication can play, we're better equipped to be able to share in those discussions about success. And then quantifying it can also mean qualifying. So you can use, you know, qualitative information to good effect, but both the upside and the downside of the digital revolution is that people generally feel that if you can put a chart together and put some numbers on it, then that has meaning. But we all know that it can be often a minority view that can have a significant impact where a majority view may not. So I think it behoves communication professionals to understand the metrics that we work with, that we can own, that we can shape and we can influence. And part of my learnings over the last couple of years has been to go looking for those metrics because they're not available easily. And particularly when you take a strategy view, like I'm proposing, it takes more thought and deeper thought to have a suite of metrics, not just one killer metric, which I just don't believe exists. Return on investment is not a single metric that we should ever claim as a measure of success for communication. So thank you very much for those questions. They lead very nicely into the next part of what I wanted to share with you today, which is in relation to metrics. And as I said, when you go back to those earlier charts that I showed you, the theoretical models, the academic models, it's all well and good to say that you should measure awareness, but it was very hard to actually find out how to do it and what aspects of measurement you should be looking at. So I've started assembling a whole range of metrics, and you're welcome to join me and link up with me for my Metric Mondays. And each Monday I share with you another metric, and I explain how you might be able to measure that particular metric. So there are some, very obvious ones. So I give you a mix of standard metrics as well as innovative metrics. But Lisa mentioned that some of you today would have a keen interest in internal communication. So I'd be interested to hear from you also what metrics you're using. And there's a whole suite of them that you can draw on. But this is just a prompt for me to say that internal comms can have its own suite of metrics. Stakeholder engagement, you can be looking at quite specific metrics for stakeholder engagement if that's the area that you're responsible for. Because as communicators and specialists in engagement, our role is to try to get people to change a behaviour in a desired direction. I think we're all having a lot of exposure to social media, and on any given day there are half a dozen metrics that are the ones that most people use in social media. But there are some other innovative metrics that are starting to become prevalent as well, where you start looking at the combined effect of influences on social listening, for example. And I don't know if many of you are involved in sponsorship activities and whether or not you're measuring the impact of those sponsorship activities, but there are also ways that you can be looking at sponsorship health as a bundle of metrics, for example, by the awareness that's created, the perceptions of your organisation as a sponsor, and the level of engagement. But the important thing about all of these is you can't determine your metrics after the fact. You have to have identified them and agreed them at the beginning of your effort rather than at the end. Otherwise, you won't be collecting the right data. So as I said at the beginning, with comms people loving words more than numbers, and I I love watching letters and numbers on SBS, so I decided I would just share with you some insights around ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4, which hopefully will be memorable for you. Measurement of communication, in the end, to me, is about accountability. Why do we do it? To be accountable for our efforts. And I have long maintained that if an engineer can be responsible for building a bridge, communicators can be responsible for the impact of our work. So measurement is an absolutely vital part of us being accountable for what we do and how we contribute to our organisations. One of the other aspects that I discovered in my measurement journey were the Barcelona principles, and this probably, it's not what you do when you go to Barcelona, there is a series of measurement principles that have been agreed by a global alliance of public relations organisations and associations. And it's very important and helpful, I think, for you to know and understand what these principles are. And while they might seem, very obvious, they give us all an approach to measurement and evaluation to move us all forward as a profession. So at the outset, there's goal setting, and that is fundamental to communication and public relations. And in my experience, I am rarely asked to write measurable objectives, and then have wondered why people don't appreciate our value. It all starts with goal setting and understanding objectives. Measuring communication outcomes is recommended versus outputs. So it's the effect of what we do and the value we create for our organisations, not just what we produce. That also leads into item 3. In terms of what we measure in item 4, it isn't only about the numbers, it is about insight, and that's where the qualitative methods are ones that help to really understand our audiences and our target audiences' effect more deeply. Number 5 is a very interesting one. That's advertising value equivalent, AVE. I'd be interested to know if any of you are using them regularly to show your value, but it's the old school technique that was set up where you could measure the column centimetres of an article that was published as a result of a media release, and then as a communication professional we could turn around and say, if you'd had to pay for that in advertising, it would be equal to X. There's a very strong view globally that AVEs are not the value of communication, and yet a lot of organisations require of their communication practitioners that we measure our value in that way. The Barcelona principles are saying that is not a recommended method. Number 6 is really important as well because it puts social media as one but not the only media channel that should be measured, and it helps us to resist the temptation to be focusing on likes and followings without truly understanding the broader impacts of our work. And then finally, that measurement and evaluation should be transparent, consistent and valid. So using good research methods. So I hope if all of you get some value out of revisiting the Barcelona principles after today. So in terms of the C and D of my ABCD, it is about capturing data, and data exists in all sorts of places, whether it's something as simple as understanding the number of media releases you produce in your communication function. And then by understanding the number of media releases you produce, you then stop and think, well, is that a good use of our time and our effort? So then you have to understand what is an efficient use of your communication resources. And then you start building up metrics based on what you're currently doing and then what you need to be doing to achieve what the organisation is expecting of you. There's no way around it, but it actually is very exciting when you start to see the power of performance that comes from capturing the data that is residing in all of your day-to-day work and then across all of your functions. But I also wanted to share with you some comms truths, just as someone who's been doing this for quite some time, and is that there is no silver bullet when it comes to measurement. There is no one metric that will prove our value. Over the years, return on investment has been a metric that was the subject of much debate as being an accounting methodology that could be applied to communication. But the debate still rages, and at this time it is not, there is no single metric in my view and in the view of others that will prove our worth. It is a combination of metrics that we need. Not all measures are equal. So as I was outlining earlier, those metrics that are above the line are ones that talk about efficiency. How well do we produce activity based on the resources that we have? The measures that are below the line are the ones that have we applied our activity in a way that creates our desired effect. So it's important to understand in your own day-to-day work, what is the value, what are you doing and why? Are you purely focused on internal outputs for your organisation? Are you an internal service provider? And if you are, how do you do that? How do you know that you're doing the right thing for your organisation? And what do your internal clients think of you, for an example? Measurement doesn't need to be expensive. As I said earlier, you can start counting today. You can start counting what you're producing purely, in a sort of simple sense right now. There are other ways that you can be building in response mechanisms, using SurveyMonkey at the end of employee briefings to be able to get some real-time feedback from staff. That doesn't have to cost anything. All it is time if you've got SurveyMonkey set up. It's about thinking right at the beginning in terms of what is going to help you to better understand the impact of your work. And finally, there has never been a better time to start measuring, both in its simplest sense, but also in terms of the information tools that are available to us as communicators now. There has never been a better time to understand our performance in a 24/7 real-time engagement environment. So I'd just like to close out by saying really what's in it for you to be involved in measurement and to embrace it. Measurement allows you to be proactive rather than reactive. It shifts you from that reactive stance and puts us in the area where we are anticipating the impact of our work. It's saving time while increasing your productivity and the efficiency of your function. It can generate cost savings by understanding where you are spending time and effort that's not productive for your organisation. But also it will allow you to have access to better information, better data that is critical now for reporting and decision making, and for securing a seat at the boardroom table, and also for being able to provide immediate insight to your organisations. So just to close out then today by just asking you this question about whether you intend to explore some opportunities to prove the value of your efforts through measurement and evaluation following today's webinar. Okay, I'll wait to see what that result is. So I'll just close out by saying that I'd be delighted to connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter, or contact me at any time. I would encourage you to access the resources and IABC's member portal. If you log in and go under the topic of communication management, you'll see a whole suite of resources that are also available to you under research and measurement. So I hope that this has been an interesting journey for you today. I see that 100% of you are going to explore some opportunities to prove your value, and I'm delighted to see that, and I wish you every success in your measurement efforts. I know that your careers and your organisations will hugely benefit from that. So Lisa, I'd like to close out, and happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
Thanks, Deb. We'll see if any additional questions come through, but in the meantime, I certainly got a lot out of that presentation, and feel very committed to, with all of the projects that I'm kicking off for the start of 2017, start on the right foot, start with the measurements that I'm going to, evaluate beginning, middle and end, to make sure that I have some great results to show, to prove where I've come to, and look at how I can build dashboards that are going to deliver those strong results as well.
That's great. So Lisa, there's one other question here from an anonymous, one of our participants saying, how do you measure understanding of key messages by stakeholders? I've used a couple of techniques. One is through focus groups, and which would be small group method of understanding key messages, but also SurveyMonkey, issuing a SurveyMonkey link, for example, after an employee briefing. Then there's also in-depth interviews where I've done work on reputation management, for example, and depends on the nature of the stakeholder, where it would be more beneficial that you provide the opportunity for them to brief you face-to-face around their perceptions of an organisation, and as part of that, their understanding of the key messages that organisation communicates.
Excellent. Well, with that in mind, Deb, we're going to actually be sending out to all of our participants today a survey as well, so that we can get some feedback on this presentation and the format of these webinars in general. We're always very interested to know other topics that you can share as well, so you can expect to see that come through. But Deb, thank you so much for your time today, your insight, and the great information you were able to present to us, so that we can kickstart 2017 on the right track with good measurement on all of the projects that we're working on as communications professionals.
Oh, my pleasure, Lisa. Thank you very much, and to everybody who's invested this hour today to upskill for the year ahead.
Thanks. The resources, as I said, this presentation will be available as a recording, and I'll actually send the link to that out when we send out the survey. And we'll also look at, Glenda's just asked a question about extra sources as well. So we'll look at what we can make available to you as well, or to the group as well, Glenda, through that email that we send out in terms of extra reading. I know I'm certainly going to be signing up to Metric Monday because I think that sort of, information is what keeps it front of mind for me, to be constantly measuring and to get new ideas as well, because it can be a real challenge to think about unique ways that you can measure unusual projects that we tend to find ourselves working on, which don't necessarily lend themselves to focus groups or surveys or the typical methods that we might use when measuring effectiveness. So just a final reminder that these webinars are every other month, and we also have our regional conference coming up on the 23rd to the 25th of August in Singapore. If you visit our website, asiapacific.iabc.com, you'll find more information about that regional conference, and you'll also see there that we're currently doing a call for speakers. So we have a number of speakers that we've already put together for the conference, but if you know of other great speakers who might be interested, or you might have a topic that you are interested in presenting, please go to that call for speakers and submit your details there. We'd love to hear from you. So if there's no final questions, we'll wrap up now. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you all again in March. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lisa.